Namaste, I'm Vani Raju, Executive Director of Ganges Valley School. Welcome to Samvadh, conversation with Ms. Aarti Rajaratnam, a well-known psychologist, author, and an innovative curriculum and educational consultant. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ma'am, today we are talking about an initiative started at Ganges Valley School, Upeksha. It is about emotional well-being, emotional regulation, equanimity, and all. In today's world, I felt that more than any other skill, this I felt was very, very important, which seems to be a major lack, or the way people are connected or communicating seems to be a major issue. What is your take on this, ma'am?
So the word upeksha also means equanimity, meaning that no matter what's happening around me, I'm able to maintain this balance within. Emotions are so integral to the human experience, and it's important to understand what an emotion really is. It's a quick information processor that enhances the quality of my life and also my relationships, and most importantly, prepares me for immediate action. So for example, we're outside now. If there was a snake here, an emotion like fear comes in to help me decide that I have to run or I have to protect myself. On the other hand, if it's not something so drastic, it can be a relationship. I meet somebody for the first time and I have this funny sensation in my body, and then it's my body's way of saying, listen, this person reminds you of that other person who betrayed you earlier, be careful. So in that sense, emotions are quick information processors, but like I said, they enhance the quality of our lives. So like you rightly asked me, how does it help us function well? If I do not know how to regulate an emotion, especially something that I'm feeling in a relational context, it's going to create a lot more rifts or a lot more conflicts. And you may notice that in the parent-child equation, sometimes in the classroom between an educator and a student, when the emotions are running high, that's when a lot of problems are created. So in that sense, the program Upeksha that we're planning starts with the first step, which is emotional awareness, then move it to emotional regulation, because without an awareness, I can't move it to regulation, and without a regulation, I cannot move it to an equanimity.
So something like, if you can name it, you can tame it.
That was one of the original definitions of emotion. But when we work with children, I like to use the other quote which says, when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, help them join your calm, don't go and join their storm.
Oh, lovely.
So in that way, what we're planning to do also is to help children become more aware of the storm that can be created by certain emotions and help them bring it into our calm, and how we as adults, both parents and educators, can work through it.
So from storm to calm is what it is going to be. Also, I have read that all emotions are good. There is no bad emotion, there is no good emotion. Somehow in our culture and our community, certain emotions are almost like suppressed or asked to be suppressed or repressed or not to be shown. Especially boys, there is that boys should not cry, and to be vulnerable is not correct. You might be taken advantage of. So how do we manage all these?
Like you rightly said, there are no bad or good emotions. An emotion just is. And in fact, I go one step further to say every honest emotion is a positive emotion. Meaning, if I'm feeling anxious in a situation where I'm supposed to feel anxious, or if I grieve at a point that I have to grieve, I'm actually doing the best thing that I can for myself. In fact, the first Nobel Prize in Medicine for a woman was for Dr. Candice Pert, and her research was on monocytes, which are actually cells that help with the immune system. And she said when people feel congruent emotion, meaning emotions that are in line with the experience that they're having, the immune system gets a good input and it's able to fight better, as opposed to people who are faking it. Like, I'm feeling angry with you, but I'm smiling because I'm expected to smile because good girls don't get angry. These are messages that come from the culture. Jealousy is demonized, but jealousy and envy are the two most important emotions for a human being for self-care and self-love.
How so?
So, for
You
example,
can give an example.
of course, I would love to, because it's my favorite emotion in some sense. So, jealousy always involves another person. Envy always involves a task. That's the difference between the two. So, for example, let's assume I'm envious of an achievement that you have. What it's really telling me is this person has set goals and reached them. How do you prioritize your goals and why are you not reaching them? So, envy reminds me to focus back on my priorities. In the same way, jealousy comes in when there is a person of friendship or an intimate partner relationship and I'm jealous of another person because somewhere there is an intimacy issue in this relationship that needs to be addressed. Jealousy comes in just to help me remind myself to work on the relationship that I may have taken for granted. So these are all very gentle ways of the body to remind the mind to focus on what is really important.
So when they're not in balance, these emotions, when they're not recognized and they're expressed in a very violent or very loud manner, why does that happen?
So we call that dysregulation. But before that, I'll talk about how we actually manage most emotions, because most people have maladaptive ways of dealing with emotion. And that comes from the belief that some are good and some are bad, right? So the first way in which any human being deals with emotion is suppression. So I'm feeling angry right now, I can't express it, so I just suppress it. But over a period, if this becomes my pattern, like when young boys are told, like you mentioned, you shouldn't cry, they just hold it back, but the emotion is a raw energy. It has to come out in another form. It could take the form of aggression, right? The second way in which people deal with emotion is repression, where I'm no longer even aware that I'm suppressing. It automatically becomes something that I'm not addressing. This is where people are totally unaware of what is happening. They get triggered left, right and center and don't know what to do. So there is these huge meltdowns and all of that when there is a lot of repression. Repression can also in the later years show up as illnesses that don't have a diagnosis.
Okay.
So you'll see people with chronic shoulder pain, they've not really strained themselves, but then there's something. Or these diabetes and things like that, where the sugar levels are not under control in spite of exercise, in spite of a good lifestyle. These things are all from repressed emotion. The third form of working with emotion, which is more common, is displacement, where I feel anger here. I'm feeling angry with you, but I go and show it to another person there who is probably weaker than me.
So usually for a husband, you're angry with your husband, you show it on your
children. Exactly. Or you're angry with your boss, you come back and show it at your dog. So some kind of displacement. So that's usually the more common way in a culture like India. Then there is the dysregulation, where I'm feeling angry, but I vent it out as aggression, go and beat people, cause harm to someone, that kind of a space. And then the most common, which is something that we see now, which is distraction that's leading to addiction. For example, I'm feeling very anxious, I don't want to deal with this, I go on to one TikTok video or something like that, and I'm just endlessly scrolling through ads and things like that. So these are all very maladaptive. However, when I look at an emotion and understand that this is what I'm feeling, when you mention name it to tame it, I start realizing that I'm feeling this, and usually it's not a clear-cut one emotion that people feel. When I'm feeling angry, I would also have a little bit of sadness in it or a little bit of guilt in it. There'll be other things. So to recognize first what I'm feeling, the awareness, second to understand what gift it brings with it, and then to regulate it at 3 levels, and then to make it a pattern. That's usually how emotions are dealt with.
Is that the reason they say journaling is one of the best tools to pen down your emotions so that you can recognize your emotions at that time?
It's one of the many ways to deal with it. Young children may not be able to journal, so we may need to give them more conscious ways of working with it. And one of the things that we do is CoRegulation, which means the adult, which is why we say come into my calm. So the child is overwhelmed by something. So usually around the 2 years, the terrible 2s as they call it, is usually when children are becoming aware of emotion, which is why those meltdowns. It's not anything else. So the first brain revolution, as they call it, the child is first experiencing a state separate from the mother
Mm-hmm.
and have to regulate their own emotions. So when we actually talk about a young child, till about 2 years, they're regulating emotions along with the mother. It's around the 2 years when we call the terrible twos or tantrums coming in, is when the children are becoming aware of emotions and they don't know what that new experience is. Which is why, many times you'll see them just, on the floor and, throwing this huge tantrum because they don't know what this new experience is. Why is this so important to understand? Every emotion has a physical component, physiological component. Every emotion has a narrative. Okay. And every emotion has a subjective experience.
Okay.
And in the regulation, unless we deal with each of these parts, it'll either go into suppression, repression, displacement, or in some other dysregulated form.
To be able to explain this
With
three
an
parts
example.
and with an example.
So let's assume that anger is an emotion that many of us are very familiar with. For some people, anger is a very temperature intensive emotion. For example, that's why popular literature will say hot-headed, because it's temperature intensive. When you experience anger, a lot of people feel a lot of heat in the body. Your fists tighten, your jaw tightens, your entire body is ready to throw a punch, because it tightens at that. That's the physiology, your heart rate increases, all of this. And second is the narrative. The narrative is, now if I've become angry with you for something, the narrative is she's always like this, she always violates my boundary, things like that. And the subjective experience also has the gift that the anger is bringing in, which is, it is a change emotion. Okay. Anger comes in only when I want to make a change in my life. It brings the raw energy required for change. So for example, when I feel angry, it's a cue that my boundary has been violated in some form and I want to change something. And that raw energy enables me to make that change if I deal with it with awareness. If I don't deal with it with awareness, I'll just take all this physical energy that's come in and throw a punch. Okay. When it becomes violence and aggression. Anger turned inwards, unfortunately, becomes sadness.
I see.
So in that sense, many emotions are also very intricately connected, which is why it's difficult for people to regulate emotion, because they don't know if it's anger they're dealing with, sadness they're dealing with, or a combination of the two. Okay. You'll see many women will say, "Ma'am, when I get angry, I don't know what happens. I have tears in my eyes and I start crying." And that is the embodiment of that emotion for them. So to become aware of the physiological aspect of an emotion is very important. And that's why we need to help children understand, I can see that you have tightened your body. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling afraid? So to give children that input and say, "No, Papa, I'm feeling very afraid." And then you can sit down and work through that. So that's the way in which we actually deal with it. As children grow older, the narrative becomes more complex. Okay. Because we start connecting it to many other incidents. So I won't leave it with this incident. I'll also connect it to, but she did this on Thursday. This person is always like this. She reminds me of this person. So we also make it a complex net that we're unable to escape. Those become complex patterns that are repeated over and over again.
I see. So let's say if a child is having meltdown and being disrespectful to the parents, saying "I hate you, I don't like you," and usually the situation worsens when the parent personalizes that whole thing and doesn't realize that the child is doing this because they're angry or they're hungry or whatever may be the reason. Now, it is not only the children who have to learn how to, but it is us parents who first have to learn how to regulate our emotions, have awareness around our emotions, regulate our emotions. Then we can mirror this to our children and they learn from us how to manage these emotions.
Most of emotion or emotional well-being is modeled, which is why it's very important, which is why our topic is join the calm, getting children to move from the storm to the calm. But as adults, I think many of us are not even aware of our emotions. A lot of people are what we call alexithymic, unaware of their emotions. They'll just tell you, "I'm feeling very funny," or "I'm having this pain in my chest." They'd like to say it as a physical complaint, but will never tell you, "I'm anxious," or "I'm having a panic attack," or any of these words. So when people are alexithymic and unaware of their emotions, they will not be able to model anything for the children.
Why do they become like that?
When there is lack of validation, Now, all of us as human beings require validation. Let's assume I'm crying right now. Even if I don't want you to console me, I'd at least like for you to, pause at this moment and say, okay, take a moment if you need to. I need to just be seen, heard, and validated at that point. But many times, this would not have been the experience for a person when they were younger. In fact, I've even heard things like my mother used to repeatedly say, girls from good families don't laugh loudly. And I'm somebody who loves, laughing out loud, and I would feel very ashamed to laugh in front of my mother. It was only much later in life when I started becoming aware of where it came from that I, again found my voice and again found that laughter. But many people don't have the luxury of that. They've just been given this thing that, if you feel this, you're bad. If you feel this, you're not worth being in this family, things like that. In fact, ma'am, if you look at it, there are the language that we speak at home mirrors our values. So in my family, intelligence was given a lot of importance. So if we wanted to insult somebody, it would be the intelligence that will be insulted. Wealth for some families is very important. So if someone doesn't have that, they would shame them with wealth. For some people, it could have been the emotions that were shamed. He's like a crybaby, or she's this aggressive, and then use foul language around it. So those kind of things, that's when people decide to repress emotion to a point that they become so rational, they disconnected from the emotional experience. So it's very important for us to help children in this generation, especially when they're already disconnected from relationships and themselves because of the internet. It's very important for helping them understand the embodied nature of emotions.
Especially because most families are living independently and both parents working, children are addicted to gadgets, so there is no connection. It's even more important to teach them regulation, awareness, and equanimity. So when Aarti ma'am, when there is, like you said, there is a storm, and usually when parents react to that storm, they're creating more chaos. So what is the best way when a child is having a reaction or a meltdown or expressing quite vigorously, violently? What is the best way to be in that situation?
The first and the most important, don't speak. Don't use words, because the child's brain, the nervous system, is already overwhelmed by the experience. And if you're given words, it'll have to put in that much more effort to process the words and act accordingly. And many times, when we raise our voice, it goes to the brain stem. At the brain stem, words cannot be processed. When the child is having a meltdown, they are not operating from the cortex or the portion of the brain that can understand and act accordingly. They are reacting from a very primitive survival, fright, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain. When I say fright, flight, freeze or fawn, it's a survival part which is driven by a stress hormone called cortisol. And some of them may also have the emergency hormone adrenaline. They're ready to run from there, and at that point, if you're trying to raise your voice and trying to control them, it escalates. The first is, if you stay silent, it becomes easier for the child's nervous system to first calm itself down. We all have the ability to do self-soothing. Give that space for self-soothing for the child. Second, de-escalate the situation as gently as you can. When I say that, the child is throwing a tantrum in a mall for a toy. And it's a very common example. Normally, the parent will say, everybody's watching you, don't shame me, don't make it about you. And the child looked at something very attractive, and from their natural tendency to have that, they're asking you for it. All you need to do is to let them know that they're not going to have it. But without de-escalating, you can't do it. At that point, you may have to pull them away from their use force. So you're using all these very negative patterns of letting them know that might is right and I will decide for you, and that your emotions mean nothing to me. So when it's that dysfunctional, it creates rifts in relationships, because people go back, 20 years later, they'll say, my father did this to me, or my mother did this to me, and they say, because of that, I'm not able to, enjoy healthy relationships. I'm not saying that, that's the healthy way to cope, but these things do scar children for life, and it's important to be aware of it. So staying calm, de-escalating the situation, and then in a very calm way helping the child exit the situation, and then the next time being proactive about the same situation is the best prescriptive that I would give.
So a parent has to work on their own emotions, their inner child triggers before they can address the child. So that's a long journey for a parent to work upon. I hope we can on this platform bring in more tools and toolkits and more skill set to deal with these emotions. Thank you, Aarti ma'am. I think this gives me a lot of confidence that Upeksha is going to be the right and the apt program for us to bring in at school. And as a team, we are all geared up to bring this into the curriculum and give this benefit to all stakeholders of Ganges Valley School, students, parents, teachers, and the management. We hope to see this very successful in the coming years.